Dear friends, settle in and let yourself unwind. This soothing story will take you into a medieval journey filled with faith and unity. After watching, share in the comments what inspired you. Your feedback means so much to me. Imagine a warm summer morning in the Valley of Olympia, where the sun is just beginning to rise over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The air is thick with the scent of wild thyme and olive trees, their leaves rustling gently in the early breeze. The distant bleating of goats echoes from the slopes, mingling with the faint clatter of clay pots being set out by vendors in the awakening agora. It's the year 776 BCE, and though no one knows it yet, today is the dawn of something extraordinary, a spark that will ignite a tradition to endure for centuries, the first Olympic Games. In a small stone house nestled at the edge of the valley, a young man named Chilon stirs awake. The straw mattress beneath him crackles as he shifts, his body stiff from yesterday's labor in the fields. At 19, Chilon is lean and wiry, his skin bronzed from long days under the relentless sun. His hands, calloused from wielding a wooden plough, still ache, but there's a restless energy in his chest today. He's heard the rumors, whispers carried by travelers and merchants, about a grand festival being organized in honor of Zeus, a gathering unlike any other. A contest, they say, where men from across the Greek city-states will compete not with swords or spears, but with their strength, speed, and cunning. Chilon sits up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and glances at the small clay figurine of Hermes on the shelf above his bed, a gift from his mother, who prayed for her son's swift feet and clever mind. The room smells faintly of the barley bread his sister, Irene, baked the night before, its crusty aroma lingering alongside the sharper tang of olive oil stored in a nearby amphora. He can hear Irene now, humming softly as she sweeps the dirt floor with a bundle of twigs, her voice a quiet melody that soothes the morning's stillness. "Chilon, you're awake at last," Irene calls, her tone teasing but warm. She's a year younger, with dark curls that spill over her shoulders and eyes that seem to catch every detail of the world around her. "Father says you're dreaming of running in this festival of yours. You'd best eat if you're to outrun anyone." Chilon grins, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "It's no dream, Irene. They say men from Sparta, Athens, even Thebes will come. Imagine it, me, standing among them, racing under the eyes of Zeus himself." Irene laughs, setting a wooden bowl of bread and figs before him. The figs are sweet, their skins splitting under his fingers, and the bread is still warm, crumbling softly as he tears it. "You'll need more than dreams to keep up with those city men," she says, but her eyes sparkle with pride. "They train with oil and sand, not just plough fields like you." Chilon chews thoughtfully, the taste of the figs bursting against his tongue. He's no stranger to hard work. His family's small plot of land demands it, but running has always been his escape. When the day's toil is done, he races across the hills, his bare feet pounding the earth, the wind tugging at his tunic. It's the one time he feels free, as if he could outrun the weight of his family's struggles. The lean harvests, the debts to the local landowner, the constant fear of drought. The festival, though, is something else entirely. It's a chance to be more than a farmer's son from a forgotten corner of Elis. The rumors of the games have been spreading for weeks, carried by traders who pass through the village on their way to the sanctuary of Zeus. They speak of a sacred truce, a time when warring city-states will lay down their arms to gather in peace. They describe contests of running, wrestling, and chariot racing, with victors crowned not with gold or silver, but with a simple wreath of olive leaves cut from the sacred grove. To Chilon, it sounds like a tale from the poets, a chance to step into the stories of heroes like Heracles or Theseus. But it's real, and it's happening here in Olympia, just a day's walk from his home. As he finishes his meal, Chilon's father, Theron, enters the house. A broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, Theron carries the weight of years spent wrestling the land for survival. His tunic is patched, his sandals worn thin, but his eyes are sharp as he regards his son. "You're serious about this, then?" he asks, his voice gruff but not unkind. "This festival isn't for boys, Kylon. The men you'll face, they've trained for this, not just dreamed of it." "I know, father," Kylon replies, meeting his gaze. "But I'm fast. You've seen me. I can do this." Theron studies him for a long moment, then nods slowly. "If you're set on it, you'll need to prepare. The festival is in 3 days. You'll go to Olympia tomorrow, see what this is all about. But don't think it's just a race. Men will come with tricks, with strength you haven't seen. And the gods—" he pauses, glancing at the figurine of Hermes. "The gods will be watching." Kylon feels a shiver, not of fear but of anticipation. The gods. The sanctuary of Zeus, with its great altar and sacred grove, is said to hum with divine presence. He's been there once, as a child, clutching his mother's hand as she offered a small clay dove to the altar. The memory is vivid. The smell of burning incense, the low chants of priests, the towering statue of Zeus looming in the temple's shadows. To compete there, under the gaze of the divine, feels like stepping into a myth. That afternoon, Kylon sets out to train. The sun is high now, baking the earth until it cracks underfoot. He runs along the familiar paths of the valley, his feet kicking up clouds of dust, his breath steady despite the heat. The rhythm of his steps is like a heartbeat, grounding him even as his mind races. He imagines the crowd, hundreds, maybe thousands, gathered from distant cities. He pictures the track, smoothed and sacred, winding through the sanctuary. He sees himself crossing the finish line, the roar of the crowd drowning out the doubts in his head. But as he runs, he passes others who are also caught up in the festival's promise. There's old Damocles, the village potter, who's been tasked with crafting ceremonial cups for the priests. His hands, stained with clay, tremble with excitement as he describes the orders flooding in from wealthy patrons. There's Lysandra, the weaver, whose fingers fly over her loom to create tunics for the competitors, her work finer than ever before. Even the children are caught in the fever, racing each other through the fields, shouting that they're Olympians. The festival is stirring something larger than Kylon's own ambitions. It's as if the valley itself is waking up, stretching toward a moment that will mark it forever. Merchants are setting up stalls along the road to Olympia, their voices loud as they hawk wine, olives, and woven blankets. Pilgrims, their cloaks dusty from travel, speak of offerings to Zeus and Hera, their eyes bright with devotion. The air hums with possibility, but also with uncertainty. Not everyone will return home triumphant. Some will lose more than a race, pride, coin, even their lives in the more dangerous contests. As evening falls, Kylon returns home, his legs aching but his spirit alight. The sky is a deep indigo now, pricked with stars, and the air carries the cool bite of night. Irony has lit a small oil lamp, its flickering light casting shadows on the walls. She's grinding barley for tomorrow's bread, her movements steady and practiced. "You're filthy," she says, glancing at his dust-streaked legs, but there's a smile in her voice. "If you're to be an Olympian, you'll need to look the part." Kylon laughs, splashing water from a clay basin onto his face. The water is cold, shocking his skin, and he feels alive, every nerve tingling with purpose. "I'll be ready," he says, more to himself than to her. "I have to be." That night, as he lies on his straw mattress, the sounds of the village drift through the open window, the lowing of cattle, the distant laughter of neighbors, the soft rustle of leaves in the olive grove. He thinks of the days ahead, of the track at Olympia, of the men he'll face. He wonders if they, too, lie awake, their hearts pounding with the same mix of fear and hope. The festival is more than a race, he realizes. It's a chance to prove something, to himself, to his family, to the gods. But what if he fails? The thought lingers, heavy as the darkness around him. As sleep begins to pull him under, Kylon hears the faint cry of an owl, its call echoing across the valley. It feels like a sign, though of what, he cannot say. The games are coming, and with them, a tide of change that will sweep through Olympia and beyond. Kylon doesn't know it yet, but his small decision to run will entangle him in a story far greater than his own, a story of triumphs and losses, of gods and men, of a world on the cusp of something eternal. And so, as the stars wheel above and the night deepens, the valley of Olympia holds its breath, waiting for the dawn of the first Olympic Games. The sun had barely crested the hills when Kylon set out from his village, a small bundle slung over his shoulder. The air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of dew-soaked grass and the faint smoke of morning fires. His sandals slapped against the dirt path, worn smooth by generations of feet, as he walked toward Olympia. The bundle held little: a spare tunic, a few figs wrapped in a cloth, a small clay flask of water, but it felt heavy with purpose. Today, he wasn't just a farmer's son. He was a pilgrim, drawn by the promise of the festival, one of many now streaming toward the sanctuary of Zeus. The road to Olympia was alive with movement. Kylon passed families trudging alongside ox carts, their wheels creaking under the weight of goods, amphorae of wine, baskets of dried fish, and bolts of coarse woolen cloth to trade or offer. A group of young men, their laughter loud and brash, strode ahead, their oiled muscles gleaming in the morning light. Spartans, Kylon guessed, from their short tunics and the confident swagger in their steps. He felt a pang of envy. They carried themselves like men born to compete, not like him, who'd only ever raced the wind across his father's fields. As he walked, the landscape began to change. The narrow paths of his village widened into a broader road, its edges trampled by the feet of travelers. The valley of Olympia opened before him, its fields dotted with olive trees and its hills crowned with the first hints of the sanctuary structures, the low, whitewashed walls of the temple precinct, the smoke rising from sacrificial altars. The air buzzed with voices, merchants haggling, priests chanting, children darting through the crowd, their shouts mingling with the bleating of goats brought for offerings. It was as if the world had converged here, drawn by the same whispers that had stirred Kylon's heart. He stopped at a small stream to drink, the water cold and tasting faintly of minerals. Kneeling, he splashed his face, feeling the grit of the road wash away. A man approached, older than Kylon, with a beard streaked with grey and a staff to steady his steps. His cloak was finer than most, dyed a deep blue that spoke of wealth. "You're for the games, lad?" the man asked, his voice carrying the clipped accent of Athens. Kylon nodded, wiping his hands on his tunic. "I'm to run," he said, trying to sound more certain than he felt. The man raised an eyebrow, sizing him up. "A bold choice. The track will be crowded with men who've trained for years. I'm Nikeas, a merchant. I've come to see what this festival is worth, and to sell a few trinkets to the pious." He gestured to a cart behind him, piled with small bronze statues of Zeus and Athena, their surfaces glinting in the sun. "I'm Kylon from Elis," Kylon replied. "I've not trained like the city men, but I'm fast. Fast enough, I hope." Nikeas chuckled, leaning on his staff. "Speed is one thing, boy. Endurance is another. And cunning, don't forget that. Men will elbow you, trip you, pray to the gods to curse your steps. But you've got heart. I can see it. Walk with me a while." Kylon fell into step beside Nikeas, grateful for the company. As they walked, Nikeas spoke of the world beyond Elis, tales of Athens' bustling agora, where philosophers argued under marble columns, of Sparta's relentless warriors, who lived for discipline, of Thebes, where poets wove stories of gods and heroes. Kylon listened, wide-eyed, realizing how small his village was compared to the vast tapestry of Greece. The festival, Nikeas explained, was more than a contest. It was a gathering of city-states, a rare moment when rivals met not to fight but to compete, to trade, to pray. The sacred truce, the Ekakeria, ensured safe passage for all, and already Kylon could see its effects. Men who might have been enemies sharing wine by the roadside, their laughter echoing across the valley. By midday, they reached the outskirts of Olympia. The sanctuary sprawled before them, its scale overwhelming. The temple of Zeus stood at its heart, its limestone columns gleaming white against the blue sky. Around it, tents and makeshift stalls had sprung up like wildflowers, their colors a riot of reds, blues, and yellows. The air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, spilled wine, and the acrid tang of burning incense from the altars. Kylon's stomach growled. He'd eaten only a fig since morning, but his eyes were too busy drinking in the scene to care. Nikeas pointed to a crowd gathered near a wooden platform. "That's where they'll announce the competitors," he said. "Go, put your name forward. I'll find you later. Perhaps I'll wager a few coins on you." He winked, then turned to haggle with a group of pilgrims eyeing his bronze statues. Kylon hesitated, his heart pounding. The platform was surrounded by men, some young like him, others older, their bodies sculpted from years of training. A priest in a white robe stood atop it, his voice booming as he called for names. Kylon pushed through the crowd, his throat dry. When he reached the front, he spoke his name, Kylon, son of Theron of Elis, and the priest scribbled it on a wax tablet. The act felt momentous, as if he'd just carved his name into the annals of the gods. As he stepped back, a tall man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek sized him up. "A farmer, are you?" the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is no place for boys who chase goats. The track is for men." His companions, burly and oiled, laughed, their eyes glinting with mockery. Kylon's cheeks burned, but he held the man's gaze. "We'll see who the gods favor," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The man snorted and turned away, but Kylon felt a fire kindle in his chest. He wasn't just here to run, he was here to prove something. The day wore on, and Kylon wandered the growing encampment. Everywhere, the festival was taking shape. Artisans hammered at wooden stands, their mallets ringing like bells. Women wove garlands of olive branches, their fingers nimble as they braided the silvery leaves. A group of musicians played lyres and flutes, their melodies weaving through the chatter of the crowd. Kylon paused to watch a potter shape a clay vase, its surface painted with runners mid-stride, their forms frozen in eternal motion. The potter, a wiry man with flour-dusted hands, grinned at him. "For the victors," he said. "Buy one now, lad, and maybe it'll hold your wreath." Kylon smiled but shook his head, his hand brushing the few bronze coins in his pouch. He moved on, drawn to the scent of roasting lamb from a nearby fire. A vendor offered him a skewer, the meat charred and dripping with fat, its flavor rich with herbs. He ate slowly, savoring the taste, the juices warm on his tongue. Around him, others ate too, pilgrims, competitors, priests, all united by the festival's pull. He overheard snippets of conversation, a Spartan boasting of his wrestling prowess, a Corinthian merchant complaining about the price of wine, a mother scolding her son for stealing an extra figure. It was chaos, but a joyful one, a tapestry of voices and lives converging in this sacred place. As evening fell, the air cooled, and the sky deepened to a velvet purple. Torches were lit, their flames casting flickering shadows across the encampment. Kylon found a spot near a small fire, where a group of travelers shared stories. An old man, his voice cracked with age, spoke of the gods' favor, how Zeus himself would watch the games, his thunderbolts ready to judge the unworthy. A woman, her face lined with worry, spoke of her son, a charioteer who'd come from Argos, risking his life for glory. Chilon listened, his own dreams mingling with their hopes and fears. He thought of home, Irene's teasing smile, his father's gruff encouragement, the quiet rhythm of their village. Here, in Olympia, that world felt distant, as if he'd stepped into a larger story. The festival was drawing people from every corner of Greece, their journeys fueled by ambition, faith, or simple curiosity. It was as if a great wave was gathering, ready to crash over the valley and reshape it forever. Chilon felt small in its shadow, yet alive with possibility. As he wrapped his cloak around himself and lay down on the hard earth, the stars above seemed to pulse with the same energy as the crowd. The games would begin tomorrow, and with them his chance to run. But what would it mean to stand among these strangers, to race under the gaze of gods and men? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the fire crackled and the night closed in. The first light of dawn crept over the hills of Olympia, bathing the valley in a soft, golden haze. Chilon woke to the sounds of the encampment stirring, the crackle of fires being rekindled, the low murmur of voices, and the rhythmic clink of bronze tools as vendors prepared for the day. His body ached from sleeping on the bare earth, his cloak barely cushioning the hard ground beneath him. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his legs, and took a sip from his clay flask. The water was lukewarm now, tasting faintly of the clay it was stored in, but it soothed his dry throat. The air was already warming, carrying the mingled scents of wood smoke, roasting barley, and the faint, earthy tang of livestock penned nearby. Chilon's stomach growled, the single skewer of lamb from yesterday long gone. He reached into his bundle and pulled out one of the figs Irene had packed, its skin soft and slightly sticky. As he bit into it, the sweetness burst across his tongue, a small comfort against the uncertainty of the day ahead. The games would begin at noon, the priest had announced last night, and Chilon's race, the stadion, a sprint across the sacred track, was among the first events. He needed strength, but food was scarce for a farmer's son with only a few coins to his name. He rose, brushing dirt from his tunic, and wandered through the bustling encampment. The sanctuary of Olympia had transformed overnight into a sprawling village of tents and stalls, its energy chaotic yet vibrant. Families huddled around small fires, cooking flatbreads on hot stones, their surfaces speckled with char. A woman kneaded dough with practiced hands, her fingers dusted with barley flour, while her young daughter tossed pebbles into a clay cup, giggling at each clink. Nearby, a merchant stirred a pot of lentil stew, its savory aroma laced with wild herbs, tempting Chilon's empty stomach. He clutched his coins, weighing whether to spend one on a bowl. Hunger won out, and he handed over a small bronze piece for a portion, served in a rough clay bowl. The stew was thick, the lentils soft and earthy, spiced with thyme and a hint of garlic. Chilon ate slowly, sitting cross-legged on the ground, the warmth of the bowl seeping into his hands. Each spoonful grounded him, easing the nervous flutter in his chest. Around him others ate too, competitors, pilgrims, traders, all bound by the simple act of sustenance. A burly man, likely a wrestler from his scarred knuckles and broad shoulders, tore into a hunk of bread, his eyes distant as he chewed. A group of boys, barely older than 10, shared a single loaf, their chatter filled with boasts about who could run fastest. Chilon smiled faintly, remembering his own childhood races with Irene, dodging olive trees until their mother called them home. Survival here, he realized, was as much about food and rest as it was about the games themselves. The competitors he'd seen yesterday, the Spartans with their oiled muscles, the Athenians with their confident strides, had resources he lacked. They'd brought slaves to carry their supplies, trainers to massage their limbs with olive oil, and enough coin to buy meat and wine. Chilon had only his own strength, his family's hopes, and the few provisions he'd carried. Yet the festival leveled them all in one way. Everyone needed to eat, to sleep, to endure the heat and dust of Olympia's summer days. As he finished his stew, Chilon watched the daily rhythms of the encampment unfold. A potter-shaped clay vessels by a fire, his wheel spinning as he hummed a low tune. The clay smelled damp and mineral, a scent that reminded Chilon of the riverbanks back home. A weaver sat under a canvas awning, her loom clacking as she wove a bright red cloth, her fingers stained with dye. Nearby, a blacksmith hammered at a bronze dagger, sparks flying with each strike, the metallic tang sharp in the air. These were the unsung labors that kept the festival alive, the work of hands that fed and clothed the thousands gathered here. Chilon's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Still dreaming of glory, farmer?" It was the scarred man from yesterday, the one who'd mocked him at the registration platform. He stood now with a companion, both holding skewers of roasted meat, their tunics finer than Chilon's patched one. "You'll need more than lentils to outrun me," the man said, grinning as he gestured to Chilon's empty bowl. Chilon stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "I'll take my chances," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The gods don't care for fine tunics or full bellies. They favor the swift." The man laughed, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We'll see, boy. The stadion is no goat path." He and his companion moved on, their laughter fading into the crowd's hum. Chilon's heart raced, not from fear but from the challenge. He needed to prepare, to loosen his muscles before the race. He found a quiet corner of the encampment, near a grove of olive trees, and began to stretch. The ground was soft here, carpeted with fallen leaves that released a faint, peppery scent as he moved. He ran in place, his feet kicking up dust, his breath steadying into a rhythm. The sun climbed higher, its heat pressing against his skin, and sweat beaded on his forehead, salty when it reached his lips. He imagined the track, 200 paces long, smoothed by priests, sacred to Zeus. He pictured the crowd, their cheers a roar like the sea, and himself darting forward, his legs a blur. But preparation wasn't just physical. Chilon knew the gods were watching, and their favor could tip the scales. He walked to the sanctuary's edge, where a small altar to Hermes stood, its stone worn smooth by countless hands. Pilgrims had left offerings, clay figurines, dried flowers, a small bronze disk etched with a runner's form. Chilon had no such gifts, but he knelt, pressing his palms to the earth. "Swift-footed Hermes," he whispered, "guide my steps. Let me run as you do, light and free." The words felt clumsy, but they came from his heart. He rose, feeling a strange calm, as if the god had heard him. By late morning, the encampment was a hive of activity. Competitors gathered near the track, their bodies glistening with olive oil applied to ward off the sun's burn. Chilon joined them, his own skin bare of oil but warm from his exercises. The track was a marvel, flanked by stone markers, its surface raked smooth. It stretched before the temple of Zeus like a ribbon offered to the gods. Spectators were already lining its edges, their voices a low hum of excitement. Chilon spotted Nicias, the Athenian merchant, among them, his blue cloak unmistakable. Nicias waved, holding up a coin as if to say he'd placed his bet. The priests moved through the crowd, their white robes stark against the colorful chaos. One carried a bronze basin of water, another a bundle of olive branches, symbols of the sacred truce. A third began a chant, his voice rising over the noise, invoking Zeus's blessing. The air grew heavy with the scent of burning myrrh, its sweet, resinous smoke curling toward the sky. Chilon's pulse quickened. This was no village race. This was Olympia, where men became legends or were forgotten. As the hour of the stadion approached, Chilon joined the other runners at the starting line. There were 12 of them, their bodies taut, their eyes fixed on the track. The scarred man was there, his grin gone, replaced by a fierce focus. A Spartan stood beside him, his shoulders broad as an ox's, and an Athenian lean and wiry, whose quick glances suggested a mind as sharp as his legs. Chilon felt small among them, but he squared his shoulders, his bare feet gripping the earth. The priest raised a hand, and the crowd fell silent. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant cry of a hawk. Chilon's heart pounded, his muscles coiled. This was it, the moment he'd dreamed of, the moment that could change everything. But as he waited for the signal, a shadow of doubt crept in. What if he wasn't fast enough? What if the gods turned their gaze elsewhere? The thought lingered, sharp as a blade, as the priest's hand began to fall. The starting signal, a sharp cry from the priest, cut through the silence, and Chilon surged forward, his feet pounding the smoothed earth of the stadium track. The roar of the crowd enveloped him, a wave of sound that drowned out his racing thoughts. His legs moved as if guided by Hermes himself, each stride light yet powerful, the dust rising in clouds around him. The other runners were blurs at the edges of his vision, the scarred man, the Spartan, the wiry Athenian, but Chilon focused on the finish line, a stone marker gleaming under the midday sun. His breath burned in his chest, his heart a drumbeat, and for those fleeting moments the world was nothing but the rhythm of his steps. He crossed the line, gasping, unsure of his place until the crowd's cheers swelled louder, and a judge raised a hand to signal his victory. Chilon, son of Theron of Elis, had won the stadium. The realization hit him like a gust of wind, leaving him dizzy. The scarred man, panting nearby, offered a grudging nod, while the Spartan clapped him on the shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. "Well run, farmer," he said, and Chilon felt a rush of pride, tempered by exhaustion. As the crowd dispersed, Chilon was led to a shaded grove where victors were honored. A priest placed a simple olive wreath on his head, its leaves cool against his sweat-soaked brow. The scent of the fresh-cut branches was sharp and green, mingling with the lingering smoke of sacrificial fires. The wreath was no crown of gold, but to Chilon it felt heavier, imbued with the weight of divine favor. He was no longer just a farmer's son. He was an Olympian. The festival was only beginning, and as the day unfolded, Olympia became a crucible of cultures, a place where the disparate threads of Greece wove together. Chilon, still catching his breath, wandered through the encampment, his wreath drawing curious glances. The valley buzzed with life, its air thick with the scents of roasted chestnuts, spilled wine, and the musky sweat of thousands gathered under the relentless sun. Everywhere, people from distant city-states mingled, their differences stark yet softened by the sacred truce. At a bustling stall, Chilon paused to watch a Corinthian trader, his hands quick as he measured out handfuls of dried figs and almonds. The man's accent was melodic, his words punctuated by gestures as he bartered with a group of Thebans. Their cloaks were dyed in rich purples and blues, colors Chilon had rarely seen in his village, where earth tones ruled. The Thebans offered a small bronze lyre in exchange, its strings humming softly as one plucked a tune. The sound was haunting, a melody that spoke of mountains and forgotten heroes, and Chilon found himself lingering, caught by its spell. Nearby, a group of Spartan women sat weaving garlands, their movements precise, their laughter sharp and unself-conscious. Unlike the women of Elis, who veiled their faces in public, these Spartans wore short tunics that bared their arms, their skin bronzed from training in the sun. One caught Chilon's eye, a woman named Myrine, her hair braided tightly, her gaze bold. "A victor, are you?" she called, nodding at his wreath. "Sparta breeds runners, too. Perhaps we'll race you yet." Chilon grinned, unused to such directness. "I'd welcome the challenge," he replied, and her laughter followed him as he moved on, the sound bright as a bell. The encounter left him curious, aware of how different her world was from his own, where women worked in the home, their voices rarely heard beyond its walls. Food was a language of its own in Olympia. Kylon passed a fire where an Athenian family shared a meal of grilled fish, its flesh flaky and scented with dill and lemon. The father offered him a piece, tearing it from the skewer with a smile. "From the Saronic Gulf," he said proudly. "Nothing like it in your dusty Elis." Kylon accepted, the fish's tang sharp on his tongue, a taste of the sea he'd never known. In return, he offered a fig from his bundle, and the man nodded appreciatively, the exchange a small bridge between their worlds. Music and song wove through the crowd, binding strangers together. A poet from Ionia stood on a wooden platform, reciting verses of gods and titans, his voice rising and falling like the tide. His words were strange to Kylon's ears, the dialect softer, more fluid than the clipped speech of Elis. A small crowd gathered, some nodding, others arguing over the poet's interpretation of Heracles' labors. Nearby, a group of boys danced to a flute's lively tune, their steps mimicking the wrestlers they'd watched earlier, their laughter infectious. Clothing, too, told stories of origin. Kylon noticed the elaborate pins securing a Thessalian's cloak, shaped like horses in mid-gallop, their craftsmanship finer than anything in his village. A Cretan trader wore a tunic embroidered with spirals, its patterns dizzying in the sunlight. Kylon's own tunic, plain and patched, felt suddenly small, yet his wreath marked him as someone more. He caught strangers' eyes, some envious, some admiring, and felt the weight of his new status. But not all encounters were harmonious. At a wine stall, Kylon overheard a heated exchange between a Spartan and a Corinthian, their voices rising over a disputed trade. The Spartan's hand rested on his dagger, the Corinthian's on a bag of coins, their words sharp as flint. "Your wine's half water," the Spartan growled, while the Corinthian retorted, "and your manners half a barbarian's." The tension broke when a priest intervened, his presence a reminder of the truce, but Kylon saw how fragile the peace was, how quickly differences could spark conflict. As evening fell, the valley glowed with torchlight, the air cooling to a gentle warmth. Kylon joined a group around a fire, where stories and songs flowed as freely as the wine. An old man from Argos spoke of his city's chariot races, his hands mimicking the reins as he described a near-fatal crash. A young woman from Lesbos sang a lullaby, her voice soft as moonlight, the words incomprehensible to Kylon but stirring all the same. He shared his own tale, how he'd trained on the hills of Elis, racing the shadows of olive trees, and the group listened, their faces lit by the flickering flames. Food bound them further. A merchant passed around a loaf of sesame-crusted bread, its surface crackling as it was torn. Another offered olives, their briny bite sharp against the bread's sweetness. Kylon contributed his last fig, its sweetness a small offering to this fleeting community. The act of sharing, of eating together, felt sacred, as if the gods themselves were present in the crackle of the fire and the warmth of shared laughter. Yet beneath the camaraderie, Kylon sensed the undercurrents of rivalry. The games were a stage not just for individuals, but for city-states, each eager to prove its supremacy. The Spartans boasted of their discipline, the Athenians of their cunning, the Thebans of their poets' wisdom. Kylon, from humble Elis, felt both part of this world and apart from it. His victory a bridge to these strangers, yet a reminder of his roots. As the night deepened, Kylon lay beneath the stars, his wreath tucked safely in his bundle. The sounds of Olympia, lyres, laughter, the lowing of cattle, drifted around him, a tapestry of voices from across Greece. He thought of Myrene's bold gaze, the Athenian's fish, the Ionian poet's verses. The festival was more than races. It was a meeting of worlds, a moment when differences clashed and blended under Zeus's gaze. But what lay ahead? The games were not over, and with each day, new challenges loomed, rivalries, alliances, and the ever-present threat of the gods' judgment. The third day of the Olympic festival dawned with a sky heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. Chilon woke to a chill that seeped into his bones, his cloak damp from the dew-soaked ground. The olive wreath, carefully tucked in his bundle, was still intact, its leaves a reminder of his triumph in the stadion. But the elation of victory had begun to fade, replaced by a gnawing unease. The festival, for all its glory, was not without its shadows. As Chilon moved through the encampment, he saw the underbelly of Olympia's splendor, hunger, deceit, and danger lurking beneath the surface of celebration. He started the morning hungry, his few remaining coins barely enough for a handful of barley cakes from a vendor. The cakes were gritty, flecked with ash from the fire they'd been baked over, but he ate them gratefully, their faint nutty flavor a small comfort. Around him, others were less fortunate. A family of pilgrims, their faces gaunt, huddled near a dying fire, sharing a single loaf so thin it barely held together. The mother's eyes were hollow as she broke off pieces for her children, her hands trembling. Chilon hesitated, then offered her his last figure. She accepted it with a nod, her gratitude silent but heavy. Hunger was only one of the festival's cruelties. The crowds that had seemed vibrant yesterday now felt chaotic, a press of bodies where pickpockets thrived. Chilon caught sight of a boy, no older than 12, slipping through the throng, his fingers darting into a merchant's pouch. The merchant, a burly Corinthian, roared and seized the boy by the arm, shaking him until coins spilled onto the dirt. "Thief!" he bellowed, drawing a crowd. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but Chilon saw no malice in them, only desperation. The merchant raised a hand to strike, but a priest intervened, his voice calm but firm, reminding all of the sacred truce. The boy was released, but not before the merchant spat at his feet, a warning to others. Chilon moved on, his hand tightening around his own small pouch. The festival drew not just athletes and pilgrims but opportunists, men who sold watered-down wine, traders who passed off cracked amphory as sound, and gamblers who lured the unwary with promises of easy coin. Near the track, Chilon overheard a heated argument between two competitors, one accusing the other of bribing a judge. "Your wrestler tripped me deliberately," the man shouted, his face red with fury. The accused, a broad-shouldered Spartan, laughed coldly, his hand resting on a dagger at his belt. The truce held, but only just, the air crackling with unspoken threats. The games themselves carried risks that went beyond bruised pride. Chilon watched the Pancration, a brutal contest of wrestling and striking, where men fought with barely any rules. The crowd roared as two competitors grappled in the dust, their bodies slick with oil and blood. One, a Theban with a broken nose, staggered to his feet only to collapse, his breath ragged. The victor, a Cretan, stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with triumph. Chilon's stomach turned at the sight of the Theban being carried away, his arm hanging limp. Death was rare, the priests insisted, but injuries were common, and some men would leave Olympia scarred or crippled. Even the sacred spaces were not immune to danger. At the altar of Zeus, where smoke rose from burning offerings, Chilon saw a man collapse, overcome by heat and the press of the crowd. Priests splashed water on his face, their chants rising as they sought the god's mercy, but the man's eyes remained glassy, his breath shallow. Chilon overheard whispers that some pilgrims had fallen ill from tainted water or spoiled food, their bodies unable to withstand the festival's demands. The air, so full of incense and roasting meat, also carried the faint stench of refuse, a reminder of the thousands straining the valley's resources. Chilon's own challenges grew as the day wore on. His victory had earned him respect, but also envy. As he walked toward the track to watch the chariot races, a group of young men, competitors who'd lost their own events, blocked his path. Their leader, a wiry youth with a sneer, wore a tunic embroidered with the symbols of Argos. "So, the farmer thinks he's a hero," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "That wreath won't save you in a real fight." Kylon's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "I came to run, not to fight," he said, meeting the youth's gaze. "The gods saw me through. Will they do the same for you?" The Argive laughed, but his companions shifted uneasily, and the moment passed without violence. Kylon walked away, his heart pounding, aware that the festival's truce was a fragile shield. He thought of his father's warning: men will come with tricks, with strength you haven't seen. The games tested more than speed. They tested resolve, cunning, and the ability to navigate a world where glory and danger walked hand in hand. As evening fell, the clouds broke, and a light rain pattered across the valley, turning the dust to mud. Kylon found shelter under a canvas awning, where Nikeas, the Athenian merchant, was counting his coins. "You're still in one piece, I see," Nikeas said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Not bad for a farmer. I won a tidy sum betting on you yesterday." Kylon managed a smile, but his thoughts were heavy. "It's not what I expected," he admitted, his voice low. "The games, the crowds, there's so much to gain, but so much to lose." Nikeas nodded, his expression sobering. "That's the way of it, lad. Olympia is a mirror. It shows the best of us, and the worst. Men come for glory, but some find only ruin. Keep your wits about you." The rain intensified, drumming on the canvas, its rhythm soothing despite the day's tensions. Kylon watched as people scurried for cover, their cloaks darkening with water. A group of children, undeterred, splashed in the mud, their laughter a bright note against the gloom. Nearby, a woman sold bowls of hot barley porridge, its steam rising in the cool air, the scent of honey and cinnamon drawing a small crowd. Kylon bought a bowl, its warmth a comfort in his hands, the sweet grains soft on his tongue. It was a small act of survival, a moment of warmth in a world that could be cold and unforgiving. As night deepened, Kylon lay beneath the awning, listening to the rain's steady cadence. The festival was a crucible, forging heroes and breaking others. He thought of the hungry family, the beaten thief, the injured pancratiast. He thought of his own race, the thrill of victory now tempered by the knowledge of what it cost to stand here. The games were not just a test of strength, but of endurance, of navigating a world where trust was scarce and danger ever present. Yet, amidst the shadows, there was still light, the shared meals, the fleeting alliances, the hope that drove men to risk everything. Kylon touched the olive wreath, its leaves damp but unbroken. He had survived the stadion, but the festival was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new contests, new rivalries, and perhaps new betrayals. The gods were watching, but so were the men around him, their eyes sharp with ambition. What would it take to endure, to hold his place in this sacred yet perilous place? The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the valley of Olympia glistening under a tentative sun. The air was fresh, carrying the clean scent of wet earth and the faint sweetness of bruised herbs trampled underfoot. Kylon rose from beneath the canvas awning, his body stiff but his spirit steadied by the night's rest. The olive wreath, carefully tucked in his bundle, was still a quiet source of pride, though its weight now felt like both a badge and a burden. The festival was in its fourth day, and the chaos of the early days was beginning to settle into something resembling order, a fragile, vibrant community taking shape amidst the tents and altars. Kylon wandered through the encampment, his sandals sinking slightly into the muddy paths. The valley was alive with purpose. Tents, once scattered haphazardly, now formed rough rows, their canvas walls fluttering in the breeze. Fires burned steadily, tended by families and traders who shared their warmth with strangers. The air was rich with the smells of roasting barley, sizzling fish, and the sharp tang of olive oil drizzled over bread. Voices overlapped in a constant hum, merchants haggling, children laughing, priests chanting low prayers that mingled with the melodies of lyres and flutes. He stopped at a stall where a woman was shaping flatbreads, her hands quick as she slapped dough onto a hot stone. The bread puffed up, its surface blistering gold, and the scent made Kylon's mouth water. She smiled, handing him a piece without asking for coin. "For the victor," she said, nodding at his wreath, which he'd tied loosely around his neck for the day. The bread was warm, its crust crisp and its interior soft, tasting faintly of the wood smoke it was cooked over. Kylon thanked her, struck by the small act of kindness in a place where survival often demanded selfishness. The festival was knitting people together, forging bonds that transcended city-states. Kylon saw it in the shared fires, where Spartans and Athenians passed around skins of wine, their rivalries softened by laughter. He saw it in the children, who played games of tag across the encampment, their accents a jumble of Corinth, Thebes, and Elis. He saw it in the traders, who bartered goods and stories with equal zeal, their stalls a mosaic of Greece's diversity, Cretan pottery with swirling patterns, Thessalian wool dyed deep red, Ionian dried figs sweet as honey. Near the sanctuary's edge, a makeshift agora had formed, its stalls crowded with goods and people. Kylon lingered by a weaver's stand, where a woman named Calliope displayed cloaks embroidered with scenes of the games, runners, wrestlers, chariots in mid-gallop. Her fingers, stained with indigo, moved deftly as she worked a small loom, her eyes bright with focus. "You're the Stadian victor," she said, glancing up. "Your name's on every tongue today. Will you buy a cloak to mark it?" Kylon shook his head, his coins too few, but he admired her work. "It's fine enough for a king," he said, and Calliope laughed, offering him a small woven band as a gift. It was simple, threaded with blue and white, but it felt like a token of this fleeting community. He tied it around his wrist, its texture soft against his skin, a reminder of the hands that wove it. The festival's heart was its shared rituals. That afternoon, Kylon joined a crowd at the great altar of Zeus, where priests led a sacrifice. The air was heavy with the scent of burning fat as a bull's carcass was offered, its blood soaking the earth, its smoke curling toward the heavens. The crowd murmured prayers, their voices a low tide, and Kylon felt a shiver as he added his own silent plea for strength. Afterward, the meat was shared, roasted over open fires and distributed among the pilgrims. Kylon received a portion, its flavor rich with salt and herbs, the act of eating a communion that bound stranger to stranger. As evening fell, the encampment came alive with stories and song. Kylon found himself drawn to a large fire, where a group had gathered, their faces lit by flickering flames. An old man from Argos spun a tale of Heracles, his voice gravelly but captivating, describing the hero's labors with vivid detail, the Nemean lion's roar, the hydra's hissing heads. A young woman from Lesbos followed with a song, her voice clear as a bell, singing of Aphrodite's love for a mortal. Kylon, emboldened by the wine passed around, shared his own story, how he'd trained on the hills of Elis, racing the shadows of olive trees. The group listened, their nods and smiles a quiet validation, and for the first time, Kylon felt part of something larger than himself. Food was the glue of these gatherings. A merchant offered a clay bowl of chickpeas stewed with garlic and cumin, its warmth spreading through Kylon's chest as he ate. Another shared a loaf of sesame-crusted bread, its nutty crunch a contrast to the stew's softness. A boy, no older than 10, proudly handed out dried apricots from his family's orchard, their sweetness a burst of summer on the tongue. Each bite was a story, a connection to a distant place, Corinth's fields, Crete's groves, Thessaly's hills. Yet, the community was not without its fractures. Kylon overheard grumbling near a wine stall, where a Spartan accused an Athenian of short-changing him. Their voices rose, hands gesturing wildly, but a shared cup of wine, offered by a neutral trader, eased the tension. The truce held, but Kylon saw how fragile it was, how quickly camaraderie could unravel. He thought of the pickpocket from yesterday, the injured pancratiast, the hungry pilgrims. The festival was a microcosm of Greece itself, united in purpose, yet divided by pride and need. As night deepened, Chilon sat by the fire, the stars above bright against the velvet sky. The air was cool now, scented with pine and the lingering smoke of the day's sacrifices. A group of wrestlers, their bodies bruised but spirits high, joined the circle, sharing tales of their bouts. One, a burly man named Leandros from Corinth, spoke of his defeat with a wry grin. "The gods favored my opponent today," he said, "but I'll drink to his victory." The group laughed, raising their cups, and Chilon felt a warmth that had little to do with the fire. The festival was building something new, a society born of shared struggle and celebration. Cities were forming in miniature, their tents and fires the seeds of future gatherings. Chilon imagined Olympia years from now, its sanctuary grandeur, its games a beacon for all Greece. But for now it was this, a patchwork of voices, tastes, and stories, held together by the fragile thread of the truce. As he lay down to sleep, the woven band from Calliope tight around his wrist, Chilon thought of home, Irene's teasing smile, his father's gruff pride. He was still their son, but he was also part of this new world, shaped by the hands that fed him, the voices that cheered him, the gods who watched. Tomorrow, the festival would continue, its contests and rituals drawing the crowd tighter together. But what would this community become, and how would it shape the legacy of these games? The fifth day of the Olympic festival dawned with a quiet stillness, as if the valley of Olympia itself were catching its breath. The sky was a clear, pale blue, the air crisp with a fading memory of rain, carrying the faint sense of damp earth and smouldering fires. Chilon woke to the soft clatter of the encampment stirring, mothers calling to children, merchants stoking their fires, the low chants of priests drifting from the sanctuary. His olive wreath, now slightly wilted but still fragrant, lay beside him, a tangible reminder of his victory in the stadion. Yet, as he tied it around his neck, its weight felt different, not just a symbol of triumph, but a marker of his place in something far greater than himself. Chilon's body ached from the days of exertion and sparse rest, his muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground. He chewed a stale barley cake, its gritty texture a stark contrast to the rich meals shared around last night's fire. The festival was nearing its end, and with it came a sense of culmination, a moment to reflect on what this gathering had meant, not just for him, but for the thousands who had converged here, their lives briefly intertwined under the gaze of Zeus. As he wandered through the encampment, Chilon saw the festival's impact etched in the faces around him. The pilgrims, their cloaks dusty but their eyes bright with devotion, offered their final prayers at the altar of Zeus, their hands leaving small clay figurines and flowers at its base. The scent of burning myrrh hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sharper tang of roasted meat from the last sacrifices. Traders packed their stalls, their voices weary but satisfied, counting coins earned from days of brisk trade. Competitors, some limping from injuries, others standing tall with their own wreaths, exchanged nods of respect, their rivalries softened by shared ordeal. Chilon paused by the track, its surface now scarred by countless footsteps, its edges littered with broken sandal straps and spilled wine. The stadion race, his moment of glory, felt like a lifetime ago, though only days had passed. He ran his fingers through the dirt, its texture cool and gritty, and thought of the men he'd raced against, the scarred man's grudging nod, the Spartan's firm handshake. They were strangers no more, bound by the contest that had tested them all. The games had done more than crown victors. They had forged a fleeting brotherhood, a shared story that would echo beyond this valley. The festival's legacy was already taking root. Chilon overheard priests discussing plans to hold the games again in 4 years, a cycle to honor Zeus and maintain the sacred truce. Merchants spoke of returning with finer goods, their stalls more elaborate. A poet, his voice hoarse from days of recitation, scribbled verses on a wax tablet, capturing the names of victors like Chilon for songs that might outlive them all. The valley itself seemed changed, its paths wider, its groves marked by the weight of thousands of feet, its altars darkened by the blood of sacrifices. Olympia was no longer just a sanctuary. It was becoming a place of pilgrimage, a heart of Greece where city-states could meet as equals. Chilon's own journey had shifted his perspective. He thought of his village, its quiet rhythms of planting and harvest, and how small it now seemed against the vastness of the world he'd glimpsed. The Spartans with their disciplined pride, the Athenians with their sharp wit, the Thebans with their poetic fervor, they had shown him a Greece far larger than his fields. Yet, his victory had also shown him that a farmer's son could stand among them, that speed and heart could rival wealth and training. The olive wreath, simple as it was, carried the weight of that truth, a legacy he would carry back to Elis. But the festival's impact reached beyond the competitors. Chilon saw it in the artisans, whose pottery and weavings now bore images of runners and wrestlers, their craft forever marked by these games. He saw it in the traders who had learned the tastes of distant cities, Corinthian fish, Cretan olives, Thessalian wool, and would carry those connections home. He saw it in the children who played at being Olympians, their games a seed for future contests. The festival had woven a tapestry of shared experience, its threads stretching across Greece, linking city-states in a way no war or treaty could. Yet, Chilon also reflected on the cost. The hungry pilgrims, the injured Pancratiast, the boy caught stealing, they were part of this story too. The games had brought glory, but also hardship, exposing the fragility of the truce and the greed that simmered beneath it. He thought of Nicias, the Athenian merchant, whose sharp eyes had seen both opportunity and risk in Olympia's chaos. The gods give and they take, Nicias had said, and Chilon now understood the truth of it. The festival was a mirror, reflecting humanity's highest aspirations and its deepest flaws. As the day wore on, Chilon joined a final gathering at the sanctuary's edge, where a feast marked the festival's close. The air was thick with the smells of roasted lamb, honeyed figs, and wine poured freely into clay cups. A group of musicians played, their lyres and flutes weaving a melody that felt both joyous and mournful. Chilon shared a cup with Leandros, the Corinthian wrestler, whose bruised face broke into a grin as he toasted Chilon's victory. "You've given Elis a name," Leandros said, his voice warm with wine. "They'll sing of you yet." Chilon smiled, but his thoughts were on the future. What would his victory mean when he returned home? Would his father's pride outweigh the debts that still hung over their land? Would irony tease him as a hero, or would the village see him as the same boy who ploughed their fields? The games had changed him, but they had also changed Olympia, planting the seeds of a tradition that might outlast them all. He imagined future festivals, grander and more crowded, drawing men and women from lands he'd never heard of. He saw the track, smoothed anew, the altars piled higher with offerings, the valley a beacon of unity in a fractured world. As night fell, the stars emerged, bright against the indigo sky. Chilon sat by a dying fire, the woven band from Calliope still tight around his wrist, the olive wreath resting in his lap. The encampment was quieter now, many already packing to leave, their voices soft with farewells. The festival had been a fleeting moment, but its echoes would linger, in the stories told, the goods traded, the bonds forged. Chilon felt a pang of longing, not just for the glory of the stadion, but for this community, this fragile society that had held them all. The legacy of the games was not just in the victors' names, but in the connections they sparked. Olympia had become a crossroads, a place where Greece saw itself reflected, its diversity, its rivalries, its shared hunger for something greater. Chilon, a farmer's son, had played his part, and that knowledge settled in him like a warm ember, steady and enduring. The final morning of the Olympic festival broke over Olympia with a gentle warmth, the sun rising soft and golden, as if reluctant to see the valley empty. Chilon stood at the edge of the encampment, his bundle slung over his shoulder, the olive wreath now carefully wrapped in cloth to preserve its fragile leaves. The air was alive with the sense of cooling fires, crushed thyme, and the faint salt of sweat from the thousands who had gathered here. The festival was over, and the tents were coming down, their canvas walls folding like the pages of a story now told. Yet, as Chilon prepared to return to Elis, he felt the weight of Olympia's days clinging to him, a sense that what had happened here would ripple far beyond this valley. The encampment was quieter now, the hum of voices softened by farewells. Families packed their carts, the creak of wooden wheels mingling with the bleating of goats being herded home. Merchants counted their final coins, their stalls nearly bare, while priests swept the altars clean, the scent of myrrh and charred bone lingering in the air. Chilon paused by the track one last time, its surface scarred by the games, its edges softened by the feet of spectators. He ran his fingers through the dirt, its texture cool and gritty, and felt a pang of longing. This place had changed him, and he knew he would carry its memory always. As he walked the path back toward Elis, Chilon passed familiar faces from the festival. There was Nicias, the Athenian merchant, his blue cloak dusty but his smile as sharp as ever. "You did well, lad," Nicias called, hefting a sack of bronze trinkets. "They'll talk of Chilon of Elis for years." Chilon grinned, waving farewell, and felt a warmth at the thought that his name might linger, even if only in a merchant's tale. He saw Calliope, the weaver, folding her embroidered cloaks, her fingers still stained with indigo. She nodded at the woven band on his wrist, a silent acknowledgment of their shared moment. Even the scarred man from the stadium, now limping slightly, offered a curt nod, his earlier mockery replaced by a grudging respect. The journey home was slow, the road less crowded than when he'd arrived. Chilon walked alone, his sandals slapping against the earth, the air cooling as the sun climbed higher. He thought of the festival sights and sounds, the roar of the crowd, the taste of roasted lamb, the haunting melody of the lesbian singer, the weight of the olive wreath on his brow. These were not just memories but threads in a larger tapestry, one that wove together the lives of strangers from across Greece. The games had been a fleeting moment, but their echo would endure, carried in the stories, songs, and crafts of those who had been here. Back in his village, Chilon's return was met with quiet pride. Irene ran to him, her laughter bright as she touched the wreath, now brittle but still sacred. "You're a hero," she teased, but her eyes shone with awe. His father, Theron, clapped him on the shoulder, his gruff voice softened by emotion. "You've brought honor to us," he said, and Chilon felt the weight of those words, heavier than any wreath. The village gathered that evening, sharing a simple meal of barley bread and olives, the flavors grounding Chilon in the familiar rhythms of home. Yet, as he spoke of Olympia, the races, the crowds, the gods' presence, he saw their eyes widen, as if the valley's magic had followed him here. The legacy of the first Olympic Games stretched far beyond Chilon's lifetime. The festival, born in that dusty valley, became a cornerstone of Greek culture, a cycle of peace and competition that returned every 4 years. The olive wreath, a symbol of victory without wealth, inspired poets and sculptors, its image carved into stone and painted on pottery. The stadium track, smoothed anew for each festival, became a sacred stage where men like Chilon could rise above their station, their names etched into the annals of history. The sacred truce, fragile as it was, planted seeds of unity, a reminder that even rival city-states could share a common purpose. Centuries passed, and Olympia's echo reached the modern world. The Games, revived in 1896, carry traces of Chilon's time in their spirit of competition and camaraderie. Today, athletes still chase glory on tracks and fields, their victories crowned not with olive leaves, but with medals that gleam like the bronze statues Nicias once sold. The roar of crowds in stadiums echoes the cheers that lifted Kylon's heart, and the shared meals of modern festivals, grilled meats, sweet fruits, the clink of glasses, recall the fireside feasts of ancient Olympia. Even the language of the games bears its mark. The word stadium itself, derived from stadion, is a whisper of that first race Kylon ran. In architecture, too, the games live on. The stone columns of ancient Olympia inspired the grand arenas of today. Their arches and curves are gnawed to the temples where priests once chanted. In music, the spirit of the festival endures. Modern anthems and fanfares carry the same triumphant swell as the lyres and flutes that played for Kylon. And in the stories we tell, the games remain a touchstone, a tale of human striving, of triumph and loss, of the fragile bonds that hold us together. Kylon, long gone, would not recognize the world of 2025, with its vast cities and electric lights. But he might smile at the sight of runners on a track, their feet pounding as his once did, their hearts racing with the same hunger for glory. He might nod at the shared meals, the laughter of strangers, the fleeting communities that form around a common goal. The Valley of Olympia is quiet now, its ruins a testament to time, but its spirit lives in every race, every cheer, every moment when humanity gathers to celebrate what it means to be alive. As Kylon's story fades, imagine him standing once more on that ancient track, the dust rising around him, the crowds roar a distant hum. The olive wreath is cool against his brow, the air sharp with time and smoke. He runs, not for gold or fame, but for the fleeting joy of movement, for the gods' gaze, for the chance to be part of something eternal. And as he crosses the finish line, the world holds its breath, just as it did then, just as it does now.